What's an NSFW fact about history that we don't get to hear too often? There is a legal penis size in Iceland. It's an old law from the Middle Ages after a woman was married off to a man, and on her wedding night was so disappointed with how small his penis was that she took him back to the church to have an annulment. Because of her, a law was made that a man must be at least 3 inches while hard to marry. There is a wonderful documentary called The Final Member in which this is an actual problem. If a man could not perform in bed during the Middle Ages, England, the wife could have her marriage annulled, but it had to be proved in the church courts. So midwives might be called to palpate his member to see if there was a medical reason for it, or prostitutes might be called for their expert knowledge. There is a carving on the side of the belfry in Ghent that depicts a man suckling the breast of a woman. The story is that the man was condemned to die unless he could prove his innocence by surviving imprisonment without food for 40 days. He could have visitors during his imprisonment, but they of course were checked for food. His daughter visited him every day. She was a wet nurse. He was let go after 40 days having survived. In ancient Egypt, soldiers proved their battle prowess by presenting the severed penises of their slaughtered enemies. Traditionally, severed hands were presented, but in 1182 BC, Libyans and other allies invaded Egypt and were defeated by the army of Ramesses III, and Ramesses suspected that some soldiers were claiming extra credit by presenting the hands of women as well as the male soldiers, so he demanded penises instead. His victory inscriptions mention 535 foreskins and hands, and has images of the piles of the body parts at the Medinet Habu mortuary temple. Back during the Age of Sail, sailors would go months and months without any women or any privacy. When they'd get to port, hundreds of prostitutes would take boats out to the ships to greet the sailors, who would almost all have sex with at least one. This included the ship's boys. Like I said, there was no privacy at all. The crew would share one huge room. Dozens or hundreds of men sleeping in hammocks slung 28 apart. So the ensuing copulation took place in the wide open. Hundreds of people having sex all over the ship in plain sight. This wasn't a rare thing. It was almost universal. Though some more religious captains wouldn't let the prostitutes on board, STDs were therefore incredibly common. Side point, British sailors got a full ration of rum equal to 8 shots every day. If they were not long out of port, they got a full gallon of beer daily. When people complain about moral decay of society, it really just means to me that they don't know about history. Society is quite chaste today compared to much of the past. The dildo was created almost 1500 years before the wheel. Pope John XII was interesting. He became Pope in 955. His high points are: turned the sacred palace into a whorehouse, fornicated with, among others, his father's concubine, various widows and even his own niece, castrated and then murdered a cardinal, blinded and then murdered his confessor, took payment for ordaining bishops and even ordained a 10-year-old boy as a bishop, ordained a deacon in a stable, refused to make the sign of the cross, toasted the devil, invoked the names of pagan gods while playing dice, and when he lost, used money from the papal treasury to pay off his debts. Granted, he was a teenager when he became pope, thanks to his dad buying the office, but still. Shi Peipu was a Chinese opera singer turned spy active during the 1960s. He pretended to be a woman for 20 years to seduce a French embassy employee and obtain classified documents. His charade went so far as to fake a pregnancy and purchase a child and pretend it was this. He managed to fool everyone, including his lover, for over 2 decades before finally being exposed to the world. Edit. The rest of the story. Apparently, it caused a massive uproar in French media. Like, how could this possibly happen? The diplomat, Boursiquot, tried to slit his own throat, but failed. Both were tried, found guilty and imprisoned for espionage, but they were soon released because the leaked documents were not all that important. Shi Peipu returned to being an opera singer in Paris, enjoying his notoriety to gain fame, before dying in 2009 at the age of 70. Boursiquot is reportedly still alive in a nursing home in Brittany, and their son is living in Paris with his family. In line with some of the other horrible stories here, when the Roman statesman Sejanus The Emperor Tiberius' right-hand man fell from grace and was executed. The Roman people were eager to take their revenge on his family as well for all the tyranny he had put them through. So they decided to kill his young son and daughter as well. There was no real issue about killing the boy, but when it came to the young girl there was a sudden outcry. It was against all precedent to execute an innocent young girl, and above that, deeply impious to put to death a virgin maid. So they had the executioner rape her first. At the Temple of Aphrodite in Cyprus, overlooking the legendary birthplace of Aphrodite, young virgin girls would tie a bowstring around their head and await a man to come along and throw a silver coin of any value into their lap. The man would say, "I demand thee in the name of the goddess." The girl then had to have sex with the man. In this way the girl would make her first fruit offering to Aphrodite. It is said that some girls had to come back for many days before they were chosen. The actual death of Radcliffe, the oddly proportioned villain from Pocahontas? Close bracket. From the Encyclopedia Virginia. The colonists, led by Captain John Radcliffe, walked into an ambush. About 33 men, or 2/3 of their number, were killed. The Indians captured Radcliffe, and their women skinned him alive using mussel shells. In 1488 an Italian noblewoman Caterina Sforza Riario locked herself in a castle to save herself from her enemies. Her enemies managed to capture her children and threatened to kill Gem if she wouldn't surrender. She climbed on ramparts, lifted her skirt to expose her female parts and shouted, "Fools, don't you see that I can make myself more children?" In colonial America a guy was arrested and charged because he drew a lewd image of his wife in the snow. Puritans didn't appreciate the art. From the 13th to the 15th of February the Romans celebrated Lupercalia, Roman precursor of Valentine's Day, which was a festival of love and fertility. Priests would sacrifice a goat and then cut the goat skin into pieces. Part of this they would wear on their heads, and other parts were cut into thongs. The men would then run around the city of Rome naked, hitting as many women with these thongs as they possibly could. Being hid would help with pregnancy or becoming pregnant. So depending on what they wanted, the women would either deliberately stand in the way of the men, or try to run away, while pretty much everyone was naked. In another part of the festivities men would draw names of women from a jar and the goal was that they'd stay together for the duration of the festival. This would often result in a lot of, intercourse. And sometimes people actually fell in love and got married after they met during Lupercalia. Witches were more often mutilated than actually burned. A lot of people banged in the White House on the day of Andrew Jackson's inauguration. Why? There was a big party and hey, how many times are you going to have that opportunity? Please subscribe and leave a like if you enjoyed this video and if you want to see more of Reddit Universe.